Oh, going to take about 10 seconds to buffer here.
Okay. My cat is going to jump up on me. That's okay.
Going to take about 10. So good morning, everyone. My name is Randall Yip. I'm founder and editor of ASAM News, and I'm here with David Lay of the Chinese American Historical Society of America. He's here to talk about Chinese Camp. For those of you who have been following the news, Chinese Camp is in Central California. It used to be populated by Chinese in the mid-1800s during the gold rush period. David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Thank you, Randy.
So the fire has pretty much devastated Chinese Camp. There's not much left from what I understand.
Yes, it was pretty devastating, and we've had this going up and down the West Coast for the last few years.
You mean in terms of the increase in fires?
Yes, a lot of
So tell
fires.
me about the significance of Chinese camp.
Well, Chinese camp was populated by a lot of Chinese starting probably end of 1849, early 1850. Uh, some people say as many as 5,000 Chinese lived there at one time. These numbers are not reliable because no one really did census at that time. But it was for the gold. We know that the Chinese on November 19th, 1849, 300 Chinese met at a restaurant, Canton restaurant on Jackson Street, to hire a white lawyer, a guy named Salim Woodworth, for the purpose of buying land on their behalf in Tuolumne County. I suspect to pan for gold, to own the land to in order to mine.
So why did
But
they
the
need a white guy to buy the
oh,
land?
Chinese could not make a claim. They were not allowed to make a claim. They can buy a claim from a white person, but they thought they can hire a white lawyer, this guy named Salim Woodworth, to help them do it. So we know they most likely bought some land, went there to start mining, but were driven out. They were at a place called Salvador, I believe, near Chinese camp. They were driven out and ended up at Chinese camp. And they started to mine there. And so there were a lot of Chinese. They have a post office by 1854. That means the government recognized them as a town. That was a big thing, to have a post office in your town. That got burned. Then the only thing that maybe the Chinese saw from that period was a church. I'm not sure if the church survived, but there's nothing left of Chinese camp except the name Chinese on the Chinese camp. Everybody left, all the building collapsed, destroyed, previous fires. The only thing that the Chinese built that are still there outside of town are the walls put up by the Chinese, stone walls as high as 5 feet. And they were to fence in the cattle, and the fire wouldn't affect those. Those stood all these years and probably will still be there.
So the Chinese had cattle?
No, no, they work for the ranchers. I'm told they were paid like 16 cents for 10 feet of workers, very little. So it was a lot of hard work. But they've put up these so-called Chinese walls all over the West Coast. A lot of the walls that survive, these stone walls to mark property, fence in the sheep or the cattle, were built by the Chinese. And then the Chinese there, locally, there's the newspaper actually cover what they claimed the first Tong War in the United States was there, but actually it was in Weaverville, 1854. The one here was 1856. And the Tong Wars in America was not between gangs and bad boys so much. Well, there were some, but mainly they were between district associations, the county where you're from. So the one at Tuolumne, we know, is between the Samyup, the city boys from near Canton, versus Yanwo, which are the Hakka or the gypsies of China, the guest people. They didn't like each other in Guangdong, so they carried it over here because we know in Guangdong they had the Hakka Punti War in starting in 1854, and 500,000 to 1,000,000 people die. So they
So,
just kind of carried it over here
so
to the mines.
the Tong War in Chinese camp, how much bloodshed was there? How many people died, injured, that sort of thing?
Something like 10. I don't remember the exact number, but there were hundreds involved with the war. And I think there were 5,000 spectators, something like that. So the newspaper, and they prepare for days. The local blacksmith was making spears, pitchfork for both sides. And of course, the Hakka, they were always lesser in number of people, less resources. And in Weaverville, that war, they even hire white mercenaries to fight for them. The mercenary wore pigtails, fake pigtails, and all that. It's kind of hilarious in many ways if it weren't for the tragedy of the bad press and actual death.
So,
But hmm,
so how successful were the Chinese in mining for gold near the Chinese camp area?
actually very successful. They were there a long time. Mining for the Chinese was done differently from the whites. The whites normally came on their own, had a friend or two, a cousin, a brother, maybe a group of five. Most of them were, one or two people that were working a claim. A claim is about an acre, and you want it near the river because you need water. Basically, it's placer mining, which means you're separating the dirt, get rid of the dirt from the gold. So you need water to wash it away. And the gold would sink to the bottom because it's heavier. And that's how you mine for gold. So you need the water. So you want to claim near the water, or that's a big problem because you can't wash the dirt. But the Chinese worked in groups, 10 to 50 as a group. They normally come from the same village, same clan. They've been living together for 20 generations. So the whites, they would get the claim and work it. And after they find gold, oftentimes they kill each other because of greed. They're just partners. They met each other, so they'll work together.
So these are white people that would kill each other? These
Yeah,
were
white
business
people will
partners?
kill each other oftentimes, and it's hard to work together. But the Chinese, they're they're normally surname clans or village clans. They've been together for 20 generations, and they don't do this because they want to go back to the village. They have no choice. So they oftentimes, because of the number of people they have, they work industrially. So the Chinese knew if there's gold near the riverbank, there's more gold underneath the river because it's just erosion. Water's bringing the gold down from the hills. And so they have enough people to dam the river upstream and built channels or sluices back down to wash the dirt because they have enough people. In southern China, there's a lot of water, so the Chinese knew water work. So they did it that way, and they could tell where rivers used to run because every time you have a lot of rain, the river or the stream will change course. And they could see this. So it's a matter of diverting the water to where the streams used to be or the river used to run. So the Chinese were able to work a mine for a decade or two, and that allowed a town to survive. Most of the white run gold mining towns were boom towns. Then they became ghost towns a year later. For the Chinese, they were able to keep the industry, drive the economy with gold mining until it developed farming, lumbering, transportation, other businesses. And that's how a lot of the towns got started by the Chinese working mines for decades. And we know this just recently from archaeological digs that the Chinese oftentimes were more than 50% of the miners. Most of the whites left and the Chinese stayed. For Oregon, for Oroville, they were 70 to 80% of the miners.
So how long did Chinese camps survive with a Chinese population before they left, or were they driven out?
They were there for about 10, 15 years for the gold. Then they stay as a transportation hub. They supply with their stores products to everybody. But the town as a whole died by the 1900s. So there's not much left there of anyone. Everything is kind of new from the 1920s to maybe a decade ago. Most of the buildings I visited several times. There's a few other things. There's a marker memorializing Mark Twain and Bret Hart because they were in that general area as part of the Mark Twain Trail. And the only thing that looks Chinese there is their elementary school. Because it's Chinese camp, they built this elementary school with the Chinese pagoda roofs. So it's very Chinese looking. I understand that survived the fire, so that is still there. What I know about Chinese camp, a lot of what I know is the elementary school students there, the third to sixth grade science academy at that elementary school studied the Chinese at Chinese camp, and they came up with a brochure. You can look it up online, and it tells a lot about Chinese camp and the history. But one thing I'm concerned about is, yes, this place didn't happen to have structures that were built by the Chinese or where the Chinese lived in. But there are many other places, heritage sites, Chinese heritage sites that needs preservation and maybe conservation. One of the first things we should do is get a LiDAR laser to at least document with measurement, 3D scanning of what it's like, so we can at least have a historic understanding of the structure to be recorded for future. Because sooner or later, all these would collapse. Because in the last few years, we had fires in Maui, the temple burned there. Hanford, about 3 years ago, their temple burned. About 50% of the objects were lost, including the temple itself, highly damaged. Lytton, British Columbia, they lost a heritage site there due to wildfire. And we have wildfires all the time, and a lot of these sites are at risk. So the thing to do is to do the LiDAR thing, but that costs money and people to go out and do the work.
So when you heard about the fire, what went through your mind? Was there a bit of sadness in you, or was it like what the history of the place is still there, but the structures are long gone, so you didn't see it as a lot? I mean, what exactly went through your mind?
Well, I knew there's nothing really Chinese there except the name Chinese camp. So in many ways, I was glad because it brought so much attention. I was interviewed by 3 TV stations right away. They wanted to know about it because all of them had this concern, thinking that there were a lot of Chinese structures there. And this is like Washington, D.C. The Chinatown in Washington, D.C. is so gentrified now. There's only about 100 Chinese living in Chinatown, D.C., basically gone. But it's a requirement that if you have a store or a business in Chinatown, D.C., you have to have a sign with a Chinese name on it. And that's the only Chineseness of Washington, D.C.'s Chinatown, just like Chinese camp. It's kind of good to remember the roots of it, but really, there's not that much there. But the Chinese did start many of these towns and was the engine, the economic engine that drove many of these towns. So they were the laborers and the economic engines as well.
So how many Chinese people are still left in the town? Would you say none, or would you say a handful?
There's none. When I went there, I tried to look, couldn't find it, but there were only maybe 100 or a couple of hundred people. There's a very small place.
So
It's
apparently there's a sign at the entrance of Chinese camp that says population 1,200, if I remember one reporter reading the sign.
Um, I don't know for sure. I don't know, but the core of the town is very small. I don't know the size of the town. Maybe is bigger than I know, but I go there. There's a sign that Chinese camp. There's a little store to buy drinks and stuff like that. The only thing to stop for was a marker. I went into town and tried to look for Chinese structures. There were a few really broken down building that some Chinese might have stayed in, but they were more modern than from the 1850s. If you
Okay,
want to
so
look for things from the 1850s, I would go to Columbia nearby. That's a state park, and they have a lot more Chinese artifacts and Chinese buildings.
so if there's anything you want people to take away from this interview, what do you want them to remember from this interview?
That the Chinese did a lot of these. Besides just the labor was the economic engine, and they did things differently to allow for this, like the way they mine for gold in groups, the same way they worked the railroad. They worked in teams, so they were very efficient in working as a group. Then we need a lot of conservation to support your local historical society. So we can buy a LiDAR laser to document all these, to do all these in 3Ds. We're teaching people how to do 3D scanning so they can 3D scan their artifacts and put them online and make them available. Do 360 scanning. That's not hard. We'll loan out the camera to do that. This is the Chinese Historical Society. We can teach you how to do photo overlays. If you have pictures, old picture of the structure at that location, we can overlay that picture at the location if you go there and stand there. I have to go now. Bye-bye.
No problem.
Bye
Thank you, David
bye.
Lay. David Lay from the Chinese Historical Society of America, talking about the significance of Chinese camps. Thanks for joining us.
Bye bye.